Well, thank you everybody for coming to our panel. My name is Michael French. This is Melinda Mock and Joe Dimmons. We are RetroBlasting. We are a YouTube channel. We've been on the internet since May 18th of 2012. Is that right?
Yeah.
And we're really happy to be at Wizard World Atlanta. Thank you for having us. The topic today is, has G.I. Joe become a G.I. joke? And before anybody freaks out, we're not about to rip on the vintage G.I. Joe. We're all Gen Xers here. We all love it. So, well, we're not all Gen Xers. Some of us are ascending into fandom, so we won't be ripping on that. So let's go forward. All right, so today we're talking about G.I. Joe, and we are at the, let's see, what is it, 1982 to 2014. We are 32 years into G.I. Joe at this point. So, or at least a real American hero. We all recognize that the G.I. Joes started in the 60s with the larger dolls. They're not dolls, they're action men. But they were true military, and then when we got into the 1980s, our generation, is why we're all sitting here, got into the real American hero with the Larry Hama comics from Marvel, and then later on the Sunbow cartoon. Now, the great thing about G.I. Joe is that it was a very eccentric toy line. You could actually buy every band member of the Village People without modifying one action figure from this toy line. Those are things that we love, but we also recognize that over its 12-year history from 1982 to 1994, G.I. Joe kind of jumped the shark a few times. Not in any fatal way, but when you're on for 12 years as a toy line, you're going to make a few missteps. If you go to the next slide, yeah, right here, you'll notice that some of these characters are a little much. A football player who was actually a celebrity football player got his own action figure, the Fridge. The guy on the lower right is a guy named Sci-Fi. He looks like a neon green RoboCop. I don't know why any kid in a G.I. Joe play environment would need an alligator wrangler at any point in his play, but you know, that's fine, sure. So what I'm saying is we all recognize that G.I. Joe was never perfect, but we all love it because it was so diverse. There were some fatal mistakes at the end, such as licensing Street Fighter II. And we just wanted to mention that because we're realists. But we all recognize that G.I. Joe started with the Larry Hama comic in 1982. If you haven't read the Larry Hama comics from 1982, they're now collected in bound volumes from IDW. If you're only familiar with the cartoon, I would highly recommend you pick up the comic book because the comic book really has maintained a lot of its quality. It hasn't aged as rapidly as the cartoon has. It was written by a man who was a Vietnam veteran, Larry Hama. He was a Japanese-American Vietnam vet, and he modeled a lot of those original characters after his experiences. Obviously, there was no dude named Cobra Commander in the jungles of Vietnam, but that was a Hasbro thing.
We don't know. I mean, we don't know for sure. Maybe he was like secret ops or something.
But the comic books are filled with actual military terminology. They're filled with sort of banter and stuff that soldiers would go through. They're great books, and you should really read them if you haven't. They're a lot of fun. Unfortunately, we now find ourselves here. I guess this is really the crux of our presentation is we're now in 2014, and I wanted to kind of open a dialogue after we kind of go through some of these elements of the new G.I. Joe, how we all feel about where G.I. Joe has landed. I don't think from the previous photographs to now, if you took the words G.I. Joe away from this, could you really tell that this was a G.I. Joe movie? I couldn't. And in some ways that's good, in some ways, well, we're going to ask some questions. In 2007, Hasbro did a 25th anniversary run of G.I. Joe action figures based on the 1982 Real American Hero run, and they were really good. I mean, it was a great anniversary move by Hasbro, and all the fans loved it. They ate it up. They bought tons of the figures. They were all modeled after the originals, and that's what kind of kick-started the sort of rising re-popularity of G.I. Joe, the resurgence of G.I. Joe, much like how in the mid-90s the Star Wars novels started to kick off the Star Wars popularity again, which then led to the special edition. It's kind of a similar parallel. But then unfortunately that popularity led to the 2009 movie G.I. Joe, The Rise of Cobra. I just kind of want to get a poll in the room. And there's no judgment here. I mean, if you love Jar Jar Binks, you can be here. It's not going to bother me. But how many of you in the room have seen this movie? Show of hands. Of those, keep your hands up. How many of you actually liked this movie? Brave men.
Okay.
All right, fair enough. Awesome. There's a few things in this movie that are sort of a problem with Hollywood in general, but in this movie I wanted to address it specifically. I had a coworker one time who told me, she coined the term simplexity. And what she means by that is that you can take a simple concept and through overthinking it, you can make it too complicated to understand, and then you ruin the concept entirely. G.I. Joe, The Rise of Cobra, suffers from simplexity. The original story of G.I. Joe is pretty straightforward. It's a group of anti-terrorist experts who go up against a terrorist organization, Cobra, and they fight to save the world from his tyranny. That's the premise statement of G.I. Joe. So in this screenshot, what we're looking at is we're looking at how the movie attempts to explain why anybody would follow Cobra Commander into battle by using this super soldier serum that's involuntarily, syringed into their neck so that they're fearless and, completely loyal. Now, I guess on one level I do understand this because there's never been any moment in human history where somebody or a population of people have followed somebody into battle based purely on their charisma. Oh, wait, they did. You see, that's really my first issue with the film and why I'm concerned about them trying to over-explain G.I. Joe, because what's scarier? To me, what's scarier is someone that I know is willingly following somebody like that, which is exactly what Larry Hama depicted in the comic book and is essentially what's inferred in the cartoon as well, which is these soldiers are willingly going with Cobra Commander to try and enact world domination. To me, that's really scary. If I found out, though, that the Baroness and all the soldiers were just hopped up on something and they were really good people who just got pulled out of a 7-Eleven and then, ganked with this stuff, I'd be like, oh, man, I feel kind of sorry for him, but I'm not really scared of him. I kind of want to help him out. Which, may or may not be the best way to set up villains. And then we have the Baroness problem. In both the cartoon and the comic book, the Baroness was sort of her own agent. She was not really loyal to Cobra Commander, as you all remember. She sort of had a dalliance with Destro. But other than that, she was just there for her own purposes, which is why everybody loves her, because she's totally independent and she's willing to betray or break off from Cobra at any point that's convenient to her.
Like Catwoman.
Like Catwoman. However, in this movie, they enacted simplexity, where they tried to connect her in 40 different ways to the core plot, rather than just leaning on her popularity as a character as she was originally depicted. So, for example, they have to have her formerly romantically involved with Duke, even though she was never romantically linked to Duke, ever. They also made sure that she was, in a twist, the sister of Cobra Commander, which was like, that's two whammies in one movie. And then we find out that she, also apparently built C-3PO. I'm kidding. She really didn't build C-3PO. But you see the point. The point is that there are way too many twists in this story that are unnecessary.
And my personal pet peeve, I just have to say this, is that when she was a good guy, before they ganked her and put the stuff in her, she was blonde, because we all know that blondes are like the good girls. And then as soon as she turns evil, somehow she finds Clairol, and she becomes a brunette. So I don't really get that, but it's really
it's been done to death.
Yes.
It's a cliche that's been done to death.
Cliche.
And this brings us to the other problem with G.I. Joe, and it's the reverse of what Hollywood generally has an issue with. It's understandable in a lot of these legacy franchises right now that they're trying to bring to the screen, that much like, I read this awesome article last year it was before Paul Walker died, about how they were able to create the Fast and the Furious franchise. And it was Vin Diesel and Paul Walker and a few other people in the movie industry getting together and kind of looking at the 21st century landscape of social media and promotion and marketing, and figuring out how to, from ground zero, make it this crowd-pleasing, all-inclusive franchise that brings in everybody and keeps the adrenaline high, even to the point where they make sure that the movies come out ahead of hype, because internet hype will actually bore you of a movie before you've ever seen it, according to studies. Because now they're talking about a movie for so long that you're already bored of it before it even hits screens, which is kind of funny. But Hollywood, with the legacy properties that aren't original, like Fast and the Furious, that are coming into this to adapt to the 21st century, they're trying to find ways to capture the wider audience. So famously, there was the controversy when they recast Starbuck in Battlestar Galactica as a female. They have recast, based on the Ultimates, Nick Fury. They've recast Electro. They've recast Boomer from Battlestar Galactica. All of this is understandable because Hollywood is trying to make sure that everybody wants to see these films. Kudos. So you would think that when G.I. Joe went across their desk, that they breathed a huge sigh of relief because they weren't going to have to worry about it. Because G.I. Joe, even by today's standards, was one of the most progressive, just diverse group of characters in pop culture. And it's because Larry Hama was a real Vietnam vet, and he modeled all of the characters after what his platoon would have looked like in Vietnam. So what I'm saying is that naturally, if I was going into the script writing process, which I know I wasn't in the room, but I would say to myself, okay, I've got all this great cast of characters to draw from. I've got a talented performer like Marlon Wayans. Who should he be? Well, my first instinct would be he needs to be Stalker, because Stalker was in the first issue of the series, and he was in the last issue of the series. He was the second in command to General Hawk, and he was the guy who was on the ground telling the Joes, giving them orders in combat. He was an extremely important character, and he served in Vietnam with Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow. And Marlon Wayans, with his mustache, kind of looks like Stalker. I mean, you put a green beret on him, and I bet you he'd be Stalker, right? Okay, so now let's say they didn't want to do that. Let's say they thought, oh, Marlon Wayans is known for comedy, so we don't really want to cast him in that role. Okay, fine. Cast him as Alpine. Alpine was second to Bazooka. They were sort of a comedic duo. That would be awesome, because that was another prominent character, especially in the cartoon. But Hollywood, in its infinite wisdom, despite being handed these characters on a platter, casts Marlon Wayans as Ripcord, who is a faceless, forgettable G.I. Joe that was barely in the series, and disappears just like that. I can't figure out Hollywood's logic on all this. I can't figure out where they want to go. Here's another one. So, does anyone remember if G.I. Joe was about mecha suits or Halo or Iron Man or anything like that? Because I don't remember those franchises really crossing up like that. It's funny to me that once again, Hollywood is trying to inject more sort of complexity into G.I. Joe than there needs to be. And they're putting elements into G.I. Joe that were never there, which only distract from the core story and water everything down. What was the big hit movie of the summer in 2008, 1 year before G.I. Joe came out? I bet you can all guess based on this picture. Iron Man. Can you hear the execs around the Hollywood drafting table when they're getting ready to do G.I. Joe? They're like, wait, Iron Man was really big. We got to have an Iron Man in our movie. And they're like, well, we're making G.I. Joe. I don't care. You got to get an Iron Man in this movie. Oh, we'll have two. And then this is what we end up with. I know it's hard to see on the slide, but you might notice that Snake Eyes has wax lips. He actually has looks like a kabuki mask. I don't really know why they did that, because Snake Eyes never needed a face mask since he doesn't, or human look like face mask since he doesn't speak anyway. Why would he need human features on his ski mask? I don't really understand why they're making some of these decisions.
That would also be the same reason why they made Optimus Prime have a mouth, and because we need talking Transformers.
Right, right. Optimus Prime definitely needs a mouth because he's a real robot that wants to do his own acting. Yeah, right. You're not going to voice him over anyway.
Right.
Now, this is another one that was really weird in this movie that I thought was a little strange.
I'm going to do them one.
Yeah, it's in the first 10 minutes of the film, we're subjected to 20 holograms of people talking to holographic people talking to real people. I don't understand what's going on. This is the first one with Hawk, and then you've got one right after that with Storm Shadow, and then you've got one right after that with Doctor Who, and then you've got one right after that with the Baroness, which we don't have a screenshot of. But this is a Star Wars thing. It's in Star Wars, people are talking to holographic people, or in high sci-fi. Where in G.I. Joe were people talking to holographic communication transmissions? I don't know. It's really weird. I would have retitled this movie. I would have called it G.I. Joe and the Holograms. Because, Hasbro did make Gem, and Hasbro did make G.I. Joe, so why not? Which brings us to G.I. Joe Retaliation. And in this movie, they decided that due to the critical backlash from G.I. Joe, The Rise of Cobra, they really needed to turn it around. So they were going to bring in a closer. They did take notes from The Fast and the Furious, and when The Fast and the Furious needed to sort of inject adrenaline into their franchise, they brought in The Rock, and G.I. Joe did the same. And then they also brought in Bruce Willis to play that famous G.I. Joe known as Bruce Willis.
Bruce Willis, yes.
He doesn't actually act anymore. Just anyone.
He doesn't have to.
No, he doesn't.
He
He's Bruce Willis.
There and
He
is
just
Bruce Willis.
Right.
he emotes.
Bruce Willis really doesn't have anything to do in this movie. He has a few lines. They open this garage door up in this scene, and they don't actually show you what's in the garage. It's just him and the Rock, and Rock's like, whoa. And then he's like, yeah. And then you don't see what's in the garage. It's awesome filmmaking. It's great.
It's not the cool mystery like what's in the briefcase in Pulp Fiction. It's
right.
You know, it's
it leaves
you're
it
just
to your
kind of left
imagination,
hanging, like,
which I guess you could see as a positive.
And then at the end of the movie, at a public military funeral, The Rock grabs a fully loaded weapon and just starts firing it into the air. Again, not really sure where the filmmakers' heads were on this, but it's like, okay, I understand that G.I. Joe isn't realistic, and you guys have taken the characters and costumed them in a way to try and make them look more realistic and more military, but then you're doing things like this. Or in the case of Rise of Cobra, in the climax, I found out in that movie that, did you know that icebergs can sink? I did not know this, but apparently an entire Arctic ice sheet, when broken by a bomb, can sink and destroy everything underneath it. I was always under the impression that ice floats, but maybe all those glasses of Coke, I had special ice, I don't know. And then this was the latest animated incarnation of G.I. Joe that came off of the popularity of the movies, and it's called G.I. Joe Renegades. The idea was sort of based off of the premise that they were going to use for G.I. Joe Retaliation. In G.I. Joe Retaliation, it follows the model of the animated Transformers movie from the 80s, where in the first 10 minutes, they kill off all the G.I. Joes except for Lady J, Flint, and The Rock. And it doesn't really matter what code names they have, because Lady J and Flint don't have hardly any lines in the movie as it is. Hey, Gambit. What's up, dude? Yeah, so they decided to take that premise and extend it and make what's essentially G.I. Joe meets the A-Team. So they are a group of renegades who used to be part of the military but were disavowed, and now they roam the earth trying to save people from their problems. I'm sure it's similar to the A-Team in the sense of, you know, farmers who keep getting their crops run off by a big corporation or whatever, and then Dirk Benedict says something awesome.
Then I want to see it.
Yeah, well, but it's not, because the animation philosophy behind this show is very strange. They sat around saying, how ugly can we make all of these characters? I want Scarlett to look like she just got hit in the face with a tennis racket. It's just a very strange philosophy on this show, and it didn't fly. It only lasted barely a season, and then it was gone. And yeah, it's kind of the legacy that we're left with. That's really the last original G.I. Joe property that we've had. And Joe and I were talking about this, and Joe had an interesting observation I wanted him to share.
You know, when we were first getting into this in the 80s, Hasbro released the action figures, and then, you know, they produced the cartoon to drive the sale of the action figures. There were lines and lines of action figures, and so they kept the cartoon kept the action figures running. But now it seems we only get new lines of the toys when there's a new, like, big hit franchise movie that they're trying to push. The shelves are left empty. The collectors are left wanting. You know, we want the toys, and we don't want to have to wait for a crappy movie to come out, you know, to have new toys. So it's kind of disheartening.
Aside from anybody in here who might have actually grown up, has anyone else been to a toy store recently? Yeah, it kind of looks like a Soviet grocery store from the height of the Cold War. You know, there's no bread on the shelves, and I mean, it's very sad, actually. I think we have just been told that we are out of time. So thank you guys so much for coming to our panel. We really appreciate it. And if you want to get in touch with us, I don't know if we have I think we might have forgotten our business cards, but we're here tomorrow. We're doing a presentation on playsets of the 80s, and then on Sunday, we're doing the 30th anniversary of Temple of Doom. So please come back.
I have
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.